Are you looking for more out of your life? Do you need ideas on how to start new businesses and how to move forward in your own personal life? Well, guess what? You have come to the right radio show. At You Can Overcome Anything podcast show, you will learn and hear from many people from all walks of life who are sharing their challenges, their stories, the habits, and the mind shifts they had to overcome to become who they are today. On top, you will get a chance to connect and see how you can overcome anything by networking and learning about your next move through this radio show. I present to you our great speakers at You Can Overcome Anything podcast show with your host, CesarRespino. Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of You Can Overcome Anything podcast show. It is your host, CesarRespino, and today I have a special guest. His name is Frank, and Frank works with individual executives and teams focusing on leadership and development. His focus of work with his client is stress management, trauma, building resilience, using flow states as personal growth, achieving peak flow states performance, and managing stress. Frank works with several Silicon Valley and Southern California organizations, as well as a private practice in Los Gatos, California. Hey, Frank, how are you today?
I'm great. Good morning.
Good morning. Glad to have you here. So, Frank, I always like to ask our guests to tell me a little bit about themselves and their upbringing and where you're originally from and how was that for you?
Sure. Yes, I grew up in the Bay Area of Northern California, San Jose, California. I grew up in a family of 5 kids. I have my father was a physician and my mother was a nurse. That's how they met. We had a big family. A lot of times to get to get yourself heard, you had to talk loudly across the dinner table. So it was a very active, engaged, kind of family. I learned at a pretty young age about but both of my parents were service professionals. My dad was a pediatrician and he really enjoyed helping people and was, really great in the community. And it seems as a result, 3 of the 5 of their kids, we all ended up doing things. My 2 of my sisters are teachers, and I became a therapist to work with people. So I went to USC in Southern California for my undergraduate. I came back up here for graduate school. Was eventually licensed, and then I started a company in the Bay Area called Turning Point. And that went on for 20 years, right up until COVID. We decided it would be a good time to shut it down because number one, we didn't have a choice. And number two, we tried to bring it all online and we did that for a while, but it just wasn't working well for us. So, and that's kind of, what I really enjoyed about you getting to be on your show is dealing with these kind of hiccups that come up in life, and we have to adapt.
Yeah, no, definitely. Wow, imagine after 20 years, you got kind of close the doors. That's huge, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about you've one of the things that you had to kind of talking about overcoming, right, and the opportunity for growth. Cancer and trauma, that's something that you've dealt with. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I've gone through my life fairly healthy, and for the most part, I excelled in sports and was good in school, and had a pretty charmed life in that way. I never smoked cigarettes. Maybe experimented with things in college, but I was never really into any recreational drugs or too much alcohol or anything like that. So it was a surprise to me. 9 years ago, I had wheezing as I was walking, and I'd go to the gym and I'd try to work out, and I felt like I couldn't breathe that well. So, my dad being a 75, 76-year-old man, him and I were walking, and he was out pacing me when he was alive at that time. And he even had kind of early stages of Alzheimer's, but he was able to say, Frank, maybe you should get that wheezing checked out. And so I went to the doctor, and he gave me a inhaler, and he said, try this. And then right when I was walking out the door from his office, he said, you know what, let's get you an x-ray. So he got me an x-ray, and I had lung cancer.
Wow.
And I did not know, it did not seem like it didn't seem possible, because I always assumed lung cancer came for the most part only from smokers, or being in some type of chemical environment. So as a result, so kind of to take you up to when this happened, I'm generally the kind of guy who's competitive, and at the time I like to ride mountain bikes and hike, and I still do all that. But rather than being at the front of the line, I've kind of had to not be the one constantly challenging to move up, and that's because they had to remove 2 of my 3 lobes on the right side of my chest. So as you can imagine, it was for the first 6 months or so, I was learning how to breathe again, and I had very low energy. Meanwhile, I had an organization I was running, and so I guess the question is, how is that an opportunity versus
Yeah.
what do we do with those things? And I think what came out of that was, I was a therapist, and I am still to this day, and I work with people who are going through moderate changes at work, or maybe some depression or anxiety, maybe a death in the family, maybe cancer, those kinds of things. And I hadn't experienced that level of severity of trauma or surprise in my life. So at one point, I had to change it around, and rather than feel victimized by it, I had to think, okay, I'm not the only person who goes through this. I mean, I was on, lung cancer chats online for months trying to look for solutions, and there were thousands of people in all these chats. So I had to reframe how I looked at it, rather than me not being as athletic as I could be, or not recovering quickly, or being more tired than I usually was. What I did, and once I was able to do that, I was able to see that, really a whole new world of really doing other things, and it's been like that since. I've had, there's been a lot of adversity in other ways, with my father dying a few years ago, and then, as all of us have been dealing with, as a sudden shutdown of things with COVID 2.5 years ago. But that, I think, really helped me with, okay, I can talk about what the textbooks say. I can tell you, what the evidence says about how to treat people, and that's fine. But once you're really in it, and we go through these things, it is gives me a whole great appreciation for how resilient and strong we are as humans, and that we can overcome way more than we think we can.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that come to mind. I mean, just even the idea and the thought that, as you mentioned, living a very healthy life, not really doing anything, to an extent of really abusing whatever that might be, and then be surprised with that. Again, oftentimes people would ask is that idea of, or that question is, I'm a victim. First, they're asking themselves, why am I the victim? Why did I have to go through this? And second, really trying to more or less understand that, why was I put in this situation? And a lot of times allow that to take them down instead of helping them. So I love how you put it, that there's an opportunity in everything that we go through, and instead of being a victim, being able to see it from a different perspective, a different lens, a different point of view, and say, well, this happened for X reason, whatever that might be. How can I extract the lessons and or the teachings of this, so that I can have a better life, right, moving forward? And I think that once you start seeing that from that perspective in anything that we do, then life, as we call it in the near future, is going to be in a better and more pleasant way, right?
Yes, exactly. And the other, I think that is exactly it. And the learning from that too is, and this comes from years of religion and philosophy and everything else, is we life isn't ever going to be perfect every day moving forward. It's what we get older, we have parents, we have relatives, we have friends, we have sisters and brothers who might get sick. All of these things happen, and we can become better at handling these things as we move through life. We can bounce back quicker and learn from them and look at them as challenges, like you said, rather than going into poor me, I can't believe this happened. And by the way, I did go through poor me for a while. I went through it
Right. Yeah.
probably a couple of months where I felt like this is just, I was in shock. So, but right, learning, getting better, moving forward. And when the next thing comes up, knowing that this will pass or it might not. Maybe I need to accept what's going to happen, but I can have energy and strength and passion and moving forward and trying to work it out.
Yeah. And and even with that, anything that we go in life, I mean, I think is natural for us to kind of sit in that place for a little bit and say, why me or poor me or whatever that may be, or go through all these different phases. I think that the critical part of that is that it's okay to sit in that place for a little bit. What's not okay is for you to stay down there all the time.
Right.
And that's the first thing. The second thing is, as we're going through all of this and we're learning and we're going through all of these different phases, is that being able to realize that maybe, as you mentioned, we might have to just accept, which means that you got to surrender. It said you don't surrender to give up, you surrender to accept. You surrender to say, okay, how can I shift things around? Or, rather than surrendering to give up, I'm going to surrender to actually make this better by doing X, Y, and Z, right?
Yeah, I love that. I love how that sounds. Right. Haven't thought of it that way. Exactly. And
Yeah.
and really accepting, what I think what you're saying is something happens, something changes, and we need to be innovative in reinventing ourselves or doing something different. So I
Right.
completely agree with that.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it kind of even going through, what happened, 2 years or 3 years now, I guess. I kind of lost track of that with the whole
Mm.
pandemic, right? I mean, we had to, a lot of people had to really, innovate. They were forced to either lose their jobs or work from home, and we rapidly found out that there's a lot of things that we can do from home now, to an extent, and people had to get creative to be able to survive, right? And so
Right.
sometimes we got to be put in a tough situation to be able to recognize that, as you mentioned, we, the human beings, have a huge potential of doing so many different things, except sometimes we don't know what that might be, that capability, just for the simple fact that, we haven't been put in that situation. So we're not expanding what we're able to do. And so we got to be part of that. Talking in regards to that, what got you, because you obviously been in this for quite some time, what got you into becoming a therapist and working in that field? What was the big motivator for you?
Yeah, I was a curious kid, and I growing up in a pretty big family, and then having a lot of extended family. My father was an Italian immigrant. His in Italian families and a lot of other immigrant families, you spend a lot of time with extended family and relatives. We'd have set weekends were spent with family, and we'd sit around and eat and talk and watch. And I'd observe people, and I was sometimes a quiet kid. As I got older, I was much more talkative. I was always kind of curious about why people did what they did, and why this is happening, and why people are different from each other, why people treat each other terrible or treat each other well. So the goal for me was helping. I thought of helping people, and it came from a place of, like I said, my mom and dad were really active in their church, and they were really active in the community. And my dad was, the kind of guy who saw patients for free for several years. He wasn't a super high, didn't money wasn't a super high priority for him. that was based on the way he grew up in an extremely poor family. So that I kind of learned that, to be service oriented, and this seemed like a natural logical progression for me. And that's what happened. And then it was different though. You think about, okay, I want to help people, but when you get into helping people, what you end up finding is you do have to really work on yourself, and you do have to really understand your motivation and why you are the way you are, and really acknowledge where you came from and where you grew up and what you witnessed and how that affected you. A lot of times we think of trauma as post-traumatic stress from people who come back from war or have a terrible car accident, and that is true. But there's these kind of traumas that happened in all of our lives as we grow up, and that they profoundly sometimes impact who we are and who we become.
Yeah, and actually, I love what you mentioned, that as you're getting into that business to help other people, in the mix of that, you find out that you gotta help yourself, and you gotta kind of rediscover or maybe learn about yourself, and that's very true. I mean, at least I can relate to that in certain aspect. I think when I was doing my 9 to 5, maybe I didn't see that so much, except now doing what I'm doing now, even with just this podcast. To me, it's like I'm always learning, right? And I look forward to that, because obviously I've interviewed so many different people from all walks of life, and there's been so many different teachings. Yet again, every time I get excited about talking to somebody, because again, you're learning something different, and you start looking at it. I'm like, from a different perspective, and you're like, wow, let me take that, what he just mentioned, and apply it in a different way, or maybe look more into it. And I think that's huge, because it helps you become I would think a better person, to be able to continue to service your clients better, right?
Yeah, exactly. We and a lot of times when they're teaching therapists and psychologists and counselors, one of the things they say is, you don't have to be the perfect human being to help people, but you kind of need to be one step ahead of your client in understanding these things.
Right.
And then you're going to learn something more about yourself, and learn, especially from clients, and have to go back and figure it out and make you even better.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that there's definitely the beauty of that, because it continues to help you expand. So I'm interested on the on how you use the flow states for personal growth. Can you tell me a little bit about that? That sounds very interesting.
Yeah, there was a book in the 70s by a guy named, it's a really difficult name, but the book is called Flow, but his name is Csikszentmihalyi is his last name, but the book is called Flow. It's the original book on flow. So one of the things that he talked about was he looked at people from all walks of life, and he looked at people who were extremely wealthy, people who were extremely poor and were in poverty, and everybody in between. And what he found was there were certain types of human beings that overcame, that it didn't matter what walk of life they were from, that they were content, happy, and productive throughout their lives. And so he did, for example, he did research on people who were working in hotel rooms, and people who were maids at the time. They called them in hotels. And a lot of what he found was that the people who were happiest and most productive and everything else had certain characteristics and ways of achieving flow states, and what that in. So there are a couple of his kind of key concepts are that if you to get into a state of flow, when we talk about flow, we're talking about, and all of us have done it one time or another in life, where you do something like a sport, business, a great business transaction, or I'm working with a client, where you get into this flow where time doesn't even seem to exist. And the best and the most simple kind of clear ways of looking at that is through sports. And sports athletes, often you'll hear they were in the zone. You'll hear things about Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, people who were unbelievably locked in, that they didn't hear anything going on around them. So what Csikszentmihalyi found was that there were people in all walks of life who did this, and they would get really into their work, They would be social with others. They would be creative, and they did all these things. They had a formula. They didn't necessarily know what it was because he just started studying this. But kind of the bottom line is, if I had any key point to get out of flow states, it is you stretch yourself a little bit beyond your limits. So you take a risk, but you don't do a crazy risk where you're going to get hurt or get in trouble. But you do a risk that you feel uncomfortable, but you've been developing the skills and the skill set to do it. So you stretch it a little bit. Once you do that, you challenge yourself a little bit. It has all kinds of chemical reactions in your body with dopamine and adrenaline and all kinds of things that lock us into a state of extreme focus. And after we're done, we have a state of extreme satisfaction. So there's a couple of people who are studying it now and using it like I do in business and other things. And there's a really, really good book called The Rise of Superman. And the author's name is Stephen Kotler. And he goes into real detail about flow states and how you can achieve it in work and life and stuff like that. But really, so what I thought as a therapist is we have all these tools to deal with depression, anxiety, and anger management and other things. And so we talk about changing the way we think and learning how to breathe and doing all of these techniques that do work if you're committed to it. But one thing that I found with flow states is if we could lock into something a client really likes to do or they really want to achieve or do and have them take that action, that takes them out of what you were talking about, Cesar, the victim stance. It's because they don't have time to think about being a victim because they're challenging themselves to do something else. And when they do that, they feel better. So I try to implement that over and over again. If especially in therapy, sometimes the techniques about getting better can get repetitive. And if you're saying, okay, I want you to do breathing exercises, I want you to reach out and talk to people, those are all great and fantastic if you can get a protocol down and do it regularly. Other times, let's go achieve something big right now. And that's what happens with what I think really helps people.
Yeah, no, definitely. Now, are you working with so you're working with individual executives and you focus with their teams. So what kind of is it any particular industry, or it could be really any industry, or is there a particular niche?
Yeah, I mean, just because I'm in the Bay Area, there's just a lot of technology
Tech.
firms.
Gotcha.
So I work with startups, but I work in Orange County right now with a heavy metals organization. So I walk into this factory where they import stuff to make important jewelry and other things. So it's really interesting. But what I do, I had an interesting career where I opened an office in the late 90s in a town over here called Mountain View, California. And across the hallway was a woman who ran a organizational training and development firm called Growth and Leadership Center. So we just got to know each other in the hallway, and she said, come and work for me. So I've done both things as I've gone through my career, and I broke off from her and started my own about 20 years ago, after 5 or 6 years of working with her. So it's been a really interesting balance ever since, and I love doing the work. And you meet you always meet people who know more than you, who are smarter than you, who are more successful than you, and like you were saying, Cesar, is that I learn from everybody I talk to, even though I'm getting paid to help them.
Right. Yeah, no, definitely. So when you get people or somebody that's might be interested in working with you, Frank, do you go through like what is the process? Do you go through a discovery call? Do you go through a session to kind of understand what their needs and wants are, so then you can kind of draft a program for them? How does that work?
Yeah, so with the in my private practice, I definitely do a pretty detailed intake and assessment with people. But before that, I do a phone consult. I talk to them about this works well if it's a good fit. I might say something to the effect of, looking for a therapist is like looking for a car. You have to,
Mm.
you have to like the car to
Yeah.
buy it. So that's a really important part, is having some sort of connection with the person you're working with. And on the business side of it, an organization might hire me to do training and development, and I have a specific tool I used. It's a brain-based assessment. It's a lot about neuroscience and
Mm.
about how teams work. And then what we do is educate the teams on, depending on how your brain works and your brain works, let's see how you can come together. And that comes out of the term psychological safety, which, Google and a bunch of companies, and specifically a woman named Amy Edmondson at Harvard, has studied this and helped coin that term. And basically, teams who feel psychologically safe, meaning that I can take risks to do something great, or if I have an idea about a project that might not seem to fit, but I feel safe enough to tell it to the group, those teams perform better than teams that are shut down and afraid and competitive, over competitive and protecting their space. So that's what I kind of work with. If you look at it, it would be like trying to build a healthy family,
Hmm.
but with a healthy team. And you know that hopefully as a result of the trainings, people can understand each other's personalities. And I like to say, once I know how you are and once you know how I am, you know what my on buttons are, rather than my triggers. What buttons to push to make me more happy and more willing to work with you as a teammate rather than a competitor.
Right. Yeah, no, definitely. No, that's huge. What has been perhaps one of your biggest challenges you've dealt with a client, like something that you helped them really overcome?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I often will be with somebody and where I don't expect to have much success, but usually the biggest. Let's put it this way: when I meet with a client, I'm looking like, and again, I'm bringing back the kind of the victim mentality that we talked about versus the warrior mentality. And if I see somebody who's dealing with major depression, for example, and they are victimized and they don't know what to do, or they don't have the energy, or can't get up in the morning, I look for that 1% warrior in there somewhere. And if I can find that, I feel like we can be really successful because we can build on that. If I can't find it, it won't be successful. But one of my what I consider a victory is again, I've had a couple of clients who maybe from a private practice perspective in my office, that they spent all of their young adulthood going in and out of institutions for mental health, and 3-day holds, and forced to stay in these 30-day programs. And then as we work together alone, or sometimes in partnering with a psychiatrist, that we see those hospitalizations decrease. And one particular client I'm thinking about, I've seen off and on for 20 years, and people say that's way too long to see somebody. But if I look at our notes from 1999 up to right now, which I haven't seen her in a couple of years, but 1999 up to right now, this person was hospitalized every other month, and now she's completely free of that. She's a different human being. She's had some surgeries, lost a bunch of weight, is very aggressive in maintaining her social network so that she doesn't spend time alone. And that's actually changed. You could see the change in her mindset. She still deals with it, but she's a very productive and happy person.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know, do you in your practice, do you see or do you deal with the drama cycle? The perpetrator, the victim, and all of that stuff. Do you deal with that, and how do you handle that? Because I know that's huge. And I would say probably 95% of the people go through that, right?
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting you said perpetrator victim. So part of the organization that I closed down after 20 years, it was all court ordered, court mandated, domestic
Mm.
violence. So we saw the perpetrators on our end. And so interestingly enough, when you say the perpetrator victim cycle, often perpetrators think they are victims.
Right.
Victims often that's a learned helplessness over time, and we need to work with both these people of really understanding, number one, that they are in charge of their lives and they can make the choices to get better. And then how we do that, and how, this kind of goes in more coaching and therapy and evidence-based stuff over the years. But a lot of people expect a major change right away, and that's not going to happen. And if we can coach, or through therapy and support, show micro victories, and then we teach the person to also talk to themselves in a way like they're a parent to a child, where they're encouraging themselves. So if I say to a victim, "Why haven't you left him yet?" And she says, "Well, I can't because of finances and everything else." And I might say something to the effect of, "Okay, what's one thing you can do to get prepared for the day that you do decide to leave?" And if she says, "I'm going to start saving money over here," or "I'm going to contact my relatives in Los Angeles and see if I can potentially stay with them in the next few months." So there's all these steps. Micro victories create major changes.
Right. And then I'm sure through that, again, as part of the drama cycle, then you have the rescuer, right? Which also kind of, you're living that vicious cycle, right? You're gonna be one of the three, right? And being able to step away from that triangle and see it from the outside view, to say, I'm no longer part of that. I understand that, but I'm no longer part of that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And and the rescuer, and we use the term rescuer, codependent person. But really, a lot of times the rescuers don't see themselves as harming themselves
Right.
based on their behavior. What they do is they feel obligated to take care of people. They also get something out of being the rescuer. And exactly as you said, part of the work is, let's pull out of that, because you're exhausted all the time, you're gaining weight, you're bitter, you're starting to get resentful, and then you go back and you do it again, and again. Cesar, you kind of open up an even bigger discussion. How does somebody become a rescuer, for example?
Right.
And we can look at family roles and culture and obligation and stuff, where people weaken themselves by over helping others, and the people they're helping, get weaker too.
Yeah.
And we need to first be strong in a way, with boundaries and rules and ways of taking care of ourselves. Then we can better help and make better decisions for those people.
Yeah. One thing that I found too is that it's not so easy to create those boundaries and those rules, specifically when it comes down to family, right? And that
Absolutely.
becomes a huge challenge. And as you mentioned, they are needed. You have to create those things. And the biggest fear, I think, and at least it has showed up in my life that way too, is that sometimes it's like, well, if I create this boundary or this rule, whatever that might be, that I know it's going to serve me to an extent, I may end up losing that relationship, or I'm going to piss off some people. And that fear then will stop you from doing that boundary, right?
Absolutely. It's such a great point. That fear will keeps people from actually reaching their full potential, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of ways. And the other thing too is, if we grow up and we're constantly told, blood is the most important thing, and you need to support your siblings, and it's your family, it's your brother, it's your mother, it's your father, even if they're doing really toxic, harmful things. Sometimes we get so caught up in, like you said, the rescuer cycle, or even the victim cycle, that we don't even get near our maximum potential.
Yeah, definitely. Frank, how can people get a hold of you if they want to work with you, or maybe learn more about what you do? How can they reach you?
Sure, you can get a hold of me through email, frank@delfugoconsulting.com. I also, you can Google me, and my name's challenging, so it's Frank@DELFIUGO consulting.com. And then if you Google that name, you can also get my phone number off online and all of that stuff.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So obviously you've been on this business for a long time. You've been doing this, and obviously, as you mentioned, you've learned a lot of it from that too. I'm curious to know, do you have any daily habits that you do to put you in a positive state of flow?
Brilliant question. So this morning I got up, I interrupted mine a little bit so I could be on with you for
Yeah.
sure. But I'll tell you what I do. I do every morning, maybe not so much on the weekends, but Monday through Friday, I do have, and I think it's really important for us to have a protocol on being, so that when we go into the rest of our day being focused. This guy named Brian Johnson, he's a, you know, kind of a philosopher person who has a business called Heroic. One of the things he talks about is your PMs determine your AMs. So really, my day today starts with what I do last night. Do I go home from work and sit on the recliner with a glass of wine and watch 5 hours of Netflix? That's not going to be as helpful as if I go home and maybe do some small amount of work to kind of keep the house in order, and then potentially take a shower, get ready for bed, and go to sleep earlier on a consistent basis. I mean, once in a while it's fine to do what you want. So that's where my protocol starts. Then the next morning I wake up and I definitely do 15 to 30 minutes of breathing every day. There's just so much research on pulling us out of, you know, traumas. Like if we talk about trauma or high stress, that's, you know, let's break our brain down into two pieces, and old brain, new brain. Survival brain is what's been around for 100,000 years, and we need that part of our brain to tell us when we're in danger. But usually now in more modern society, it gets triggered and it tells us we're in danger when we're not. And when it tells us we're in danger, we have all this stress hormones and survival mechanisms hitting our body, and it's not helpful for us to make rational decisions and things like that. So one thing that breathing does is it strengthens our newer brain, with our prefrontal cortex, to counterbalance the effects of our amygdala, we call it, in the middle of our brain. And that's really so breathing is really one of the most helpful things. And then I watch I watch or read or do a meditation on something that has to do with my work. And usually it's not a long time, it's 15 minutes. And I just do that to kind of integrate how my day is going to be. And, you know, I always have books out, like this is the Four Agreements, right?
Yeah.
Great book. Yeah. So those I review a lot because I just believe in them. And then, so I'll do a little bit of review, and then I'm most productive in the morning, in case you didn't notice. I mean, I do have coffee here, but I'm most productive in the morning. So I do what we call deep work in the morning. So if I wake up, I'm doing tasks that I turn everything off around me, and I only focus on those tasks. And then by 10 o'clock this morning, I'll be seeing clients. But really the exercise also comes on those days too. You know, 2 days a week working out, and then 3 days a week just being outside. But really keeping consistent like that keeps me, you know, I like to think of it, if we're in this to really maximize our potential, I also like to think of it as, if I can keep my energy up and have the energy of two people, then I can also help others too. Yeah. And once I get into a point of back into maybe feeling victimized or weak or tired, I can't serve anybody, and I don't feel as good if I can't do that.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. And for those people that are listening to us and are watching us, like, what will be your advice in terms of how critical it is to have a daily routine, or to have something that, as you mentioned, right, creating something? Because again, you know, I know when I used to work for a 9 to 5, and I'm not knocking the 9 to 5, you know, I didn't think of that. I mean, I didn't think of having any kind of routine. Maybe my only routine is like I get up, brush my teeth, shower, and let's get ready to go to work, kind of thing, right?
Right.
And
Right.
then, and as you mentioned, you come back and you sit on the couch and you do all these different things. And when you were talking about that, it reminds me of what Les Brown talked about. And he said, if you do what is easy, your life will be hard. If you do what is hard, your life will be easy. And there's a lot of lessons that come with that, because again, yeah, you're right. It's easy for me to sit on the couch and watch TV and do all that stuff. It's easy for me to be out late at night on the weekends and be drinking every single weekend, right? It
Mm-hmm.
is hard though to say, I'm gonna be disciplined to have a routine. It's gonna be hard to do X, Y, and Z, yet the rewards are gonna be huge. And
Mm-hmm.
so for those people that might be in the fence line, like how critical is it to have something drill down for you?
Yeah, that's such a great point. I love that Les Brown quote. The thing that's really the way I see it is this: if I'm doing little things to build good habits, little things, it might seem like not that much, but once I'm doing these little things consistently, it's going to all of a sudden turn into big things that I'm able to do. So a lot of people, I think, we don't understand the importance of it because it looks like too big of a mountain to climb. If I want to lose 20 pounds, I can't keep looking at 20 pounds. I need to look at half a pound a week or a quarter of a pound a week and know that there's going to be some ups and downs. So I think the other thing too is the building a routine is really important in keeping our minds clear and our focus on things that matter. So if I have a mission and a goal and something I want to do, and I develop a protocol or a process that I'm doing a daily practice, then that's going to reinforce in a positive way that I'm getting where I want to go. And like the other thing too, it builds our resilience for when bad things happen,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we're like preparing for it all the time. We're getting stronger and stronger and stronger.
Yeah, no, I love that, Frank. My last question for you is for the people that are listening to us and are watching us, if they're going through any challenge, whatever challenge that might be, what will be one thing that you will say to them so they can start overcoming that challenge?
Yeah, that was such a great question, and not even knowing what that challenge is. Part of it is I would go from a guy named Viktor Frankl. I think I've actually heard him mentioned in your podcast before.
Yeah.
But he talks about, we have a choice no matter what situation we're in. And one of the things I would say, if you're challenged with something in your life, we will call that the stimulus, and then how you respond to the challenges is the end of that. What determines if we're successful or not is what we do in between. So if you're in a really difficult time right now, and your response could be, as we talked about before, to wait for it to end, which it won't, or in between figuring out your response, it's really defining steps to take to move forward and move out of it. And that could mean starting exercising. It could be spending some time alone in the morning, calling a mental health therapist, calling a coach, finding a life coach, doing something that you're actively working on, whatever you're going through. And I would say you don't have to do it alone. Yeah. We have peer groups, support groups, therapy groups, life coaching groups. There's so much out there now that wasn't around 10 years ago, that really isolation is not helpful. So really reach out, and again, flow state would be, if you're shy and afraid to reach out, you reach out to one person, and then you start to feel better, and then maybe you get in a group later.
Yeah. And with today's technology, right, and social media, I mean, it's that much easier for you to join some sort of group, even if it's, a free group to begin with, just to kind of help you going.
Yeah.
Started. So, that's always a good thing. We didn't have that before. So that's huge.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree 100%.
Awesome. Frank, thank you again for sharing all that stuff with us. Is there anything else you want to say before I let you go?
No, just thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate you. And I, had an opportunity to listen to several of your podcasts, and it's really great. It's such a great service, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you so much for that. And for the rest of you guys, do me a favor. Please make sure that you go ahead and connect with Frank. Reach out to him. See if there's something that you guys can do there. And more than anything, do me a favor. Please share this podcast because definitely somebody needs to hear it. And I will see you guys in the next episode of You Can Overcome Anything podcast show. Thank you.
Hi, I'm CesarRespino, real estate investor, business coach, and consultant, and author of the book, You Can Overcome Anything, Even When the World Says No. My number is 424-501-6046. In my book, I talk about making the necessary changes to shift your mind for prosperity and certainty. Pick up your copy at Amazon. I also love helping families with their real estate and can purchase your house fast and all cash. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. My number is 424-501-6046.
Thank you for having me today. I am so glad you've tuned into this podcast. You can find me at your favorite podcast platform where you can like, subscribe, comment, and share. And to learn more about myself, my services, you can find me at www.CesarRespino.com, or you can also find me at your social media. Thanks for joining me, and I am looking forward to having you at the next episode. And know you truly can overcome anything.